Time required for working the several devices. The figures in Table 2 are typical of results obtained by this method of work with Raccoon number 1. The figures are the times in seconds for the 40 trials on each of 13 simple locking devices and the two groups. Similar tables for the other animals have been prepared, but as they would present no significant variations other than those that will be mentioned as the exposition proceeds, it has been thought best not to publish them. The locks in the case of this animal were learned in the order here given. The large figure 1s mark the record of the trial in which the animal worked the lock in 1 second for the first time. The medium figure 1s mark the record of the first trial in which the standard of 1 second was permanently reached. The learning curves. In order to give a graphic representation of the nature of the learning process, as shown in the animal's experience with the locks, the following method was adopted, for which the writer is indebted to the kindly assistance of Professor W.E. Story of the Mathematical Department of Clark University. First, all trials affected by known sources of error were eliminated from each series. Then, since the working of the lock in 1 second had been determined upon as the standard of perfection, the number of trials necessary to attain the standard permanently was determined. Each series naturally gave a different number. Reference to Table 2, for instance, shows that in the series for the bolt, the standard was reached on the 17th trial, while in the case of the horizontal hook, the standard was reached on the 4th trial. The times of the trials were then plotted as ordinates, and the number of trials from the first experience with the lock till the standard was reached as abscisses, as many equidistant points being taken along the horizontal axis as there were trials necessary to reach the standard. Thus, in the case of the bolt mentioned above, the whole baseline would be divided into 16 equal intervals, giving with the point of origin 17 points, while in the case of the horizontal hook it would be divided into 3 equal intervals, giving 4 points. Proceeding in this manner, it was possible to superimpose graphically the curves for all the trials of an animal on all the locks. The average of all the times of the superimposed curves for any single ordinate, therefore, determined a point in a generalized curve of learning which, as a whole, represents each animal's experience with all the locks. Several of the curves thus obtained are given in Plate 1, figures 1 through 5, are the curves respectively of raccoons number 3, 5, 4, 1, and 2. No explanation has yet been found for the elevations in curve number 4 at intervals 3 and 6. The curves, with perhaps the exception of the first, have the usual form of the learning curve. They agree in showing at first a more or less rapid falling off in the time required to work the different devices, followed by a gradually decreasing rate of progress as perfection is neared. The curves, however, fall into 3 groups of somewhat different types represented by figures 1 and 5, 2 and 3, and 4, respectively. Comparing figures 2 and 3 with figures 1, 4, and 5, it appears that the young animal learns more rapidly at first, having perhaps more to learn than the old, as shown by the sudden and long fall in their curves, figures 2 and 3, while the old animal profits more evidently by experience, as shown by the uniformly low level of the curves in figures 1, 4, and 5, after about the 18th or 20th interval. The continued unevenness of the curves for the young animals is undoubtedly due to the fact that their learning is accompanied by fumbling and distraction of attention for a long time. The variation between figures 2 and 3 may be due to the fact that figure 3 represents the trials of an animal that is partially or totally blind, and thus is compelled to rely more definitely on touch and smell, and so loses the directness attendant on sight. Figures 1 and 5, with their peculiar rise at the 12th interval, do not readily lend themselves to interpretation. This is especially true in view of figure 7, which represents the combined trials of the above 4 animals on one locking device. This device was not the first one given, but one chosen after each animal had had some experience with locks. This particular curve represents the tests on the vertical gate hook. It is typical, I think, when all things are taken into consideration. It presents, however, the above-mentioned peculiarities of figures 1 and 5, but has the same general character as all the curves. These rises may mean that after the first period of learning there is a short period of forgetting, or of inattention and indifferent effort. Familiarity with a given locking device would in such a case enter as a factor to increase the time. I have already described something of this sort in the trials of number 1 on the plug, page 470. We may have here perhaps the analogue of the plateaus, which have received attention in the learning curves of human subjects. A comparison of figures 1, 5, and 4 would seem to indicate that there may be a temperamental factor in these elevations. The animals whose trials are represented by figures 1 and 5 are slower in all their activities than the animal whose trials are represented by figure 4. Figure 6 is interesting by way of comparison. This represents the series of 30 trials, each on 9 simple locking devices used by Kinnaman in his experiments with the monkeys, which were similar to those used by me with the raccoons under very nearly the same conditions. The figures are taken from his table and plotted on the same plan as the curves already considered for the raccoons. The general character of the curves is evidently the same for both animals. The value of the first experience seems, however, a little more evident in the case of the monkeys, as shown by the steep descent of the curve. Indeed, the monkeys would seem to be a little less clever at the start. Elevations like those in figures 1 and 5 are to be noticed, but farther apart, falling on intervals 8 and 18. The irregularity of the curve would suggest that the raccoon is less open to distraction than the monkey, and this might be considered by some as evidence of a lower level of intelligence on the ground, that the coon works mechanically, but the opposite position might just as well be taken on the ground that the curve shows greater power of concentrated attention, which is evidence of higher intelligence. My own position is one of uncertainty, since I have never had an opportunity to make general observations of the monkey's activities. These differences may also be of a temperamental character. It would seem evident on the face of the curves alone that the two animals stand fairly close together in the matter of learning to undo locking devices. Combinations 1 and 2 were given to boys and girls to learn, and the results of the trials were plotted on the same plan as the curves given above. Although the number of trials necessary to attain the standard fell inside of 30, yet the character of the curve is the same as in the case of the animal. The curves and the observations which they rest upon seem to justify the following general conclusions. 1. The learning curve for the raccoon follows closely the type of those found for other higher animals and for man. 2. The variations of method which appear in the animal's working of the locks and lead up finally to a permanent method seem to be simply the tendency to the formation of a short circuit by the elimination of useless movements, the permanent method being the shortest circuit for the raccoon. 3. There appears to be an increasing husbanding of energy and profit by experience with increasing age. 4. There is an evident ability to respond to small differences in complex relations. How far the perception of such relations really enters is, however, for the present in doubt. Table 2. Time required for working the several devices in the case of raccoon number 1. A giant table of numbers that I am not reading. Plate 1. Figures 1 through 7. As described in the text. Experiments upon association and memory. No one who has had to do with animals doubts that they remember, but the question as to the nature of the memorial processes is quite another matter. We have good reason to believe that the life of the animal lies very largely in the field of sense experience, and an apparent recognition of relations may in any case prove to be nothing more than a reinstatement of the conditions under which the first association was formed. During the tests with the raccoons on the simple logs, varying intervals of time broke the series of 40 trials for each into groups of a less number. This was necessitated by the failing interest of the animal, but was readily accepted by the experimenter from a desire to discover if there was any well-defined recollection from one period to another of the work done. It was soon evident, as had been expected, that the animal carried over from period to period some sort of an association, which resulted in a reduction of the time consumed in the working of the lock. It was then decided to give a crucial test to coon number 1 using combination 1 as the apparatus. The animal had been given preliminary trials with combination 2 for a period of 9 days, the intervals varying from 17 to 37 hours. The results of these trials showed that memory is perfect for such short periods. The tests with combination 1 extended over a period of 332 days, and the intervals varied from 9 hours to 286 days, the latter period including the time of hibernation. The severity of the test is evident. Where the interval was short, the memory was perfect. At the end of the long period, there was a repetition of a series of trials similar in character to those made when the box was presented for the first time more than a year before. Only 24 trials were necessary to attain the perfect standard, which had previously required 107 trials, and the times of these 24 trials were much shorter than the first 24 trials of the 107 trial series. It is thus clear that while complex associations lapse somewhat with a long interval in which the original conditions are not present, there is yet retained a pretty fair knowledge of what was at first presented. In the case of simple locking devices, however, after an interval of more than a year, with no intervening trial, different animals attack the lock with about the same accuracy, and with no greater variation in the time consumed than would appear in successive trials at the end of an original series in which the time had been reduced to its lowest factor. Simple associations would seem then to be quickly and permanently fixed. It is extremely easy to underestimate the difference in associative responses that may follow the change in a single element of the situation presented to the animal. Animal number 6, which manifested such fear and obstinacy when the keeper carried a certain stick, never seems to associate blows from the stick with the keeper himself. Numbers 3 and 8, which are always shut up at night in a small cage by themselves, had to be driven at the first with blows from a stick. Now the association has been transferred to a mere movement of the box, at which signal they spring to the door and claw it open. No relation exists for them between keeper and box until the box has first been moved from the wall. A study of the number of errors made in learning combination 1 brought out a tendency which had not shown itself before. If the animal left off a series of trials with a certain number of errors, and the intervening period was short, it would, in the majority of cases, begin the next series of tests with a less number of errors than it was making at the end of the preceding series. Two factors may have contributed to this result. 1. An unconscious elimination of errors during the interval of no practice. 2. A positive development of the right order, the 1, 2, 3, 4, thrusting itself into the foreground until at last it gained the ascendancy. The raccoon seems to give a high grade of attention to the work in hand. This is of importance in the development of its associations and their permanence. Perfection of the order of manipulation seems to come suddenly at last, in spite of what we know from the curves and otherwise of the framework of associations which has been slowly set up in the midst of long-continued and apparently aimless fumbling. Experiments on color perception. There is excellent experimental evidence that monkeys can discriminate colors as such. With raccoons, the only experiments as yet reported are those of Cole, 10, which he himself regards as inconclusive upon this point. The experiments about to be described seem to me to indicate with a good deal of probability that the raccoon cannot discriminate colors as such, but depends on differences in brightness alone. His color blindness will perhaps seem less remarkable when it is recalled that the raccoon is the most nocturnal of all our mammals save the bats and flying squirrels, and that the work of Schultz and Ramon y Cajal has shown that the retinas of nocturnal animals in general to be deficient in the retinal cones which seem to be essential for color vision. Footnote. Cross-reference also Perrineau, 27. La sensibilité de l'œil aux couleurs spectrales. The eye of the raccoon also agrees with the results of Slonaker, 31, for other mammals below the primates in its lack of aphobia. Apparatus. 1. A board 1 inch by 10 inch by 48 inches had 6 holes bored on its center line, 6 inches apart. 6 cylindrical tin cans of uniform height and diameter, 4 inches by 2.5 inches, were fitted with plugs on the bottom, made to fit the holes in the baseboard, and thus prevent their being overturned. These cans were covered with Milton Bradley papers. 4 were covered with the standard colors red, blue, yellow, and green, the other 2 with neutral gray number 1 and green gray number 2. 2. The second piece of apparatus accomplished the same purpose as the first, by the use of 6 vertical slides, 6 inches by 3 inches, with an opening 2 inches by 1.5 inches, cut at a uniform height from the base. These slides could be set in guides in front of separate compartments 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches by 6 inches. The guides separated the slides about 2 inches from each other. One set of slides was covered with the same papers as the cans of the first apparatus. A second set was covered with Herring's graded grays. This apparatus did not allow the animal to look into the container in which the food was placed. The Milton Bradley papers were tested for brightness in a darkened room on a color mixer, using discs of black velvet and white cardboard as standard black and white. These determinations gave the approximate brightness value of red in terms of the white cardboard as 14 degrees, green gray number 2, 70 degrees, blue, 82 degrees, neutral gray number 1, 140 degrees, green, 167.5 degrees, yellow, 240 degrees. The Herring grays of apparatus number 2 were matched for brightness with the same apparatus as used above, but in diffused daylight. The black was given an approximate correction by use of Kirschmann's correction factor. Wundt's Philosophical Studies, Volume 5, page 300. These corrected numbers gave the series of approximate brightness values for the grays as 14.5 degrees, 18 degrees, 70 degrees, 105.5 degrees, 179.3 degrees, and 360 degrees, respectively. Method of work. The 2 pieces of apparatus were used indifferently. The food was placed under one color, and when this color was moved to a new position, every other color was given a new position also. All changes in the apparatus were made out of sight of the animal. When the apparatus was set, it was so placed as to give the animal about 3 feet of free space for approach. In this series of tests, the trials were made also under widely varying conditions of illumination, viz., morning, afternoon, twilight, cloudy days, and at night by lamplight. The sense of smell was fogged by strong essences, essential oils, and other means used by trappers to disguise the trail. Narrate. Back on track. Results of experiments in color perception. Of the several thousand tests made on different animals, I have given in tables 3, 4, and 5 a series of tests covering color experiments with 2 animals and brightness with 1, Kuhn's numbers 1 and 2. The results in tables 4 and 5 were obtained from the same animal, Kuhn number 2. Each vertical column gives the number of times in 30 trials in which the animal went directly and without hesitation to the color named. For further abbreviation, gray in Table 5 represents the sum of all the choices of brightnesses other than black. These tables are, I think, characteristic of all results obtained by further tests on the same or different animals. They show nothing more than a qualitative tendency. No tests involving Weber's law have yet been made. Table 3, food in green, a table I am not reading. Table 4, food in red, a table I am not reading. Table 5, food in black, a table I am not reading. Where color and brightness enter as simultaneous factors in a series of tests as in tables 3 and 4, some confusion results. A comparison of the results from all the tests on color and brightness in percentages, tables 6 and 7, shows a decided variation in favor of brightness. These tables summarize all the color and brightness experiments thus far made. It will be recalled, of course, that in the experiments with the brightness and also with the colors, the animal should have chosen rightly by mere chance in about 17% of the trials. That Kuhn number 2 did better than this is probably due to brightness discrimination. Table 6, showing a percentage choices of colors. Kuhn number 1, 960 tests, 20.5% right choices, 43.3% upper limit, 7% lower limit. Kuhn number 2, 1,020 tests, 40.7% right choices, 63.3% upper limit, 23% lower limit. Kuhn number 3, 600 tests, 16.5% right choices, 26% upper limit, 8% lower limit. Kuhn number 5, 450 tests, 18.4% right choices, 30.5% upper limit, 12.5% lower limit. Table 7, showing percentage choices of brightness. Kuhn number 1, 690 tests, 45.5% right choices, 90.3% upper limit, 16.6% lower limit. Kuhn number 2, 600 tests, 65% right choices, 96% upper limit, 36% lower limit. Kuhn number 3, 420 tests, 59.7% right choices, 93.3% upper limit, 10% lower limit. Kuhn number 5, 360 tests, 39.7% right choices, 90% upper limit, 30% lower limit. Profiting by the experience in discrimination of brightness when associated with color, the animals attain, as shown in Table 7, a high level of discrimination when brightness alone is presented. Cole's experiments seem to confirm the results here recorded. His black-white tests give values superior to those tabulated by me, he having obtained as high as 100% in a 50-trial series. He displayed his test colors pairwise, however, thus offering but 2 possible choices, while in my experiments the number of possible choices was greatly increased in that all 6 slides were exposed simultaneously. Thus, if the tendency to discriminate should appear in the case of the 6 exposures, it must thrust itself up through a comparatively thick stratum of disturbing elements. In the case of the red-green tests, one of Cole's animals made as high as 91.5% of right choices, and another 83.33%. He found, however, in this case as well as in that of the blue-yellow discrimination, that many more trials were necessary to attain successful discrimination than were necessary for a like discrimination of black-white. A comparison of the Milton-Bradley papers, used by Cole as well as by myself, according to the approximate determination of brightness given on page 479, shows a brightness difference for blue-yellow of 158 degrees, red-green 153.5 degrees, black-white 345.52 degrees, black-yellow 225.52 degrees, black-blue 67.52 degrees, black-green 153.02 degrees. My own experiments show that in a rough way the raccoon can discriminate a difference of 4 degrees, and since all Cole's tests, save one, lie far outside this difference, I feel that his results give stronger confirmation of brightness discrimination than of color discrimination. Undoubtedly, the raccoon can be taught to make what seem to be color discriminations, but it will really be a discrimination of brightness difference, which discrimination is essential to his wild life. He hardly needs color discrimination, since in the darkness of the night all colors fade to graded grays. Imitation. When we approach the study of imitation in animal life, we enter upon a field of controversy and of clashing definitions. It is necessary, therefore, that I state explicitly what I am going to mean by the word in the section that follows. I begin by excluding at the outset all very accurate and nicely adjusted coordinate movements which bear the marks of inherited motor responses. If one of two puppies is thrown into the water and paddles his way to the shore while a second one looks on, we by no means have a case of imitation when the second puppy is likewise thrown in and also paddles ashore. And we can further exclude even those sorts of activity which are dictated by a strong gregarious instinct. We shall not, in the present instance, regard as imitation such actions as the general flight of a flock of crows when one or two of their number start off in alarm. For present purposes, we shall regard as imitative those activities only which are individual in their nature and which are formed on the model of the acts of other animals. The action of the parrot which learns to talk, and the youth who goes to the Klondike in order, like others, to make his fortune, we shall regard as imitative. And we may distinguish two grades, illustrated tolerably by these two examples. A lower grade in which the imitation is executed for the satisfaction which it itself gives, and the other in which the imitation is undertaken with a view to the accomplishment of a definite result. The first of these is of an instinctive type and appears characteristically in many birds besides the parrot, in human infants, and possibly in the young of other species. The second is of a rational character, and when present is a mark of considerable psychic development. Here the issue seems fairly joined, for in raising the question, does the animal, on seeing a certain action performed by another, desire to do the same in order that a certain result may follow? We take our stand on the borderline, howbeit somewhat broad, which separates rational from merely intelligent thinking. In interpreting an action as imitative, many investigators have placed great stress on what the animal saw, at the expense of what the animal desired. But even what an animal sees is by no means always certain, quite apart from physical imperfections in vision due to albinism, myopia, or nocturnal habits. Like Jastrows really do, and apparently do, what an animal really sees and what it apparently sees may be widely different. Sufficient data from general observations are not yet forthcoming to certify the usual methods of testing imitations as fairly free from probable sources of error. Citations will illustrate the point of contention. Berry, too, writes in regard to the rat, When put into the box, he first tries to get out at the place nearest to the food. But not succeeding there, he gradually works away from that spot until he has tried almost every spot in the box, or until he pulls the string that opens the door. Then, his attention being attracted to the door by the sound it makes in opening, he runs to it and passes out to the food. When he is put back, take notice of what happens. Does he run at once to the string, pull it, and open the door? By no means. He tries the door, and finding it closed, makes many random movements before starting in the general direction of the string. After nosing about in its vicinity for a time, he finally succeeds in finding it and pulling it, and thus escapes. It is not until he has got out many times that he goes at once to the string, pulls it, and passes out, without making at first a number of random movements. These facts in regard to the way the rat learns to get out of a box are of vital importance in helping us to decide what we may reasonably expect from the rat in regard to imitation. If, when a rat by chance pulls the string and hears the door open, passes out and is fed, it cannot go directly to that string when put back, why should we expect a rat that has merely witnessed the performance to be able to do it? The rat that opens the door not only sees the string and sees his paw pull it, but he has in addition all the sensations that are connected with the movement of pulling the string, while the rat that looks on has only the visual sensation, no kinesthetic sensations. It seems to me that we ought to be able to say a priori, in the light of these facts, that no ordinary rat would be able to open a door by pulling a string, simply from having seen another do it, without first making a number of random movements. It is upon such a slender basis that Mr. Barry infers imitation. He lays great stress on the visual sensation as the chief factor in what he calls the final imitative act. It would seem as though he begs the whole question. If the act was imitation in any true sense, just what we should expect would be the rat pulling the string with much fewer random movements. Else in what particular does number 2's method of learning to get out of the box differ from that employed by number 1? Indeed, it would seem to require more than the ordinary rat to acquire the ability to free itself from the box, if it had no other tutelage than seeing another rat do the same thing. Small 32 expressly states that he has never seen a case of what might be called inferential imitation. By this I mean, he says, merely the learning to do a thing by seeing another do it, the purposive association of another's action with a desired end. Cole, 10, again writes in regard to his raccoons. After having had some 6 weeks of experience in distinguishing a black from a white card and in distinguishing complementary colors, each of the 4 raccoons developed a tendency to reach over the front board of the apparatus and claw up the colored cards. This tendency was encouraged, and finally they would claw up the right food card and go to the high box to be fed, or having clawed up the wrong no food card, they would claw it down. So far as imitation is in question, the important point is that the raccoons did begin to do, or try to do, what they had seen done by the experimenter. Before they began this, they had learned to watch the cards and the movements of the trainer's hands very closely indeed. Therefore, the animals either imitated, or else, from their impatience to see the right card come up, there sprang the idea that they themselves might make it come up. This, however, may be all there is in intelligent imitation. To the present writer, it seems that there is yet another alternative in this case. The behavior of the raccoons in clawing up the cards was due either to imitation, or to the idea that they themselves might make the proper card come up, or it was an accidental result of the raccoon's inveterate impulse to attack and manipulate anything that can be moved. The animals had already associated the colored cards with the getting of food, had earlier still been accustomed to get food by attacking some sort of fastening. From this, it is a short step, hardly a step at all, to attack the card holders. After having succeeded a few times in thus starting the train that leads to feeding, the activity would become stereotyped like the opening of boxes or any other. In any case, we might expect imitation to occur, if at all, more readily when members of their own species furnish the models. And while these cases remain few and uncertain, we may well entertain reserve as to those where the coon seems to imitate the experimenter. As to the imitation of one coon by another, though I have been alert to discover it, I can report only doubtful or negative observations. Coon number 3 sits up and begs for food. Figure 11, Plate 2. She took up this activity of her own accord. I have simply strengthened the association of food and sitting up by refusing food unless she does so. At the first, number 8 used to sit up also. They took up the attitude together. Soon number 8 dropped it and then picked it up again about 3 weeks later. Now he sits up regularly. Number 2 and number 4 were taught to climb to the top of the stand in the middle of the floor of the cage for their food. Number 4 was taught to stand up on this stand for his food. He is blind, so no visual element could have entered into his learning of the trick. But number 2, which climbs to the stand with him, never stands up for food unless it is held directly above her head, when she will reach for it. Number 2 has had good opportunity to observe and therefore copy, but no imitation has resulted. It might perhaps be thought that the climbing of the stand was the beginning of the imitative process, but number 2 has been accustomed to climb to my shoulder for her food for more than a year. Climbing to the stand was therefore simply a change of place. In the cases of number 3 and number 8, the position which they assume is one which is natural to the animal when suddenly startled. It then sits up to look for the cause of the disturbance. The position is also a preliminary fighting attitude. Both animals are timid and have not been long in captivity. It would seem, therefore, that we had here merely a partially transferred association from that of danger, sit up, to that of food, sit up. Number 6 has taken to himself the habit of jumping for his food. This activity has been fostered until he now jumps about 3 feet high for his morsels. He is in the midst of the pack when they are being fed. No other animal has yet copied his method, although he rubs against them and jumps from their midst continually. 6 animals escaped from the cage in one night by pulling down the wire netting in a corner at the ceiling. 3 of these belonged to one litter. A mother and her 2 young were the second 3. Once out of the cage, the first 3 jumped from the window to the ground a distance of some 60 feet. 2 escaped, the injured one was recovered. The other group concealed themselves in one of the ventilating shafts in the wall of the building, from which they were extricated with difficulty. 3 other animals remained in the cage and made no apparent attempt to escape. The case of the 6 that escaped might be considered as indicating something of imitation, but I think it rather a case of the group or gregarious impulse, to which I have already referred, as of a different sort from the strict type of imitation under consideration. We know as yet so little of the importance of to animals of litter and species odors, and of the general basis of gregariousness, that this factor must not be lost sight of. Excluding such cases as this last, and the doubtful ones of defecation and play already referred to, pages 456 and 460 above, I have seen nothing that I thought I was justified in regarding as a clear case of imitation, especially none of the inferential type. At the same time, I am far from believing that imitations of the more instinctive type may not yet appear, especially in the case of young animals and of raccoons when free at night. Summary. In summing up the results of the observations and experiments reported above, the writer feels justified in making the following statements. 1. The common opinion of the adroitness and cunning of the raccoon is well-founded and in agreement with his habits in the wild, and with what may be inferred from his physical equipment and great adaptability. 2. The raccoon's instinctive powers of attention and curiosity are of a high order, as compared with those of other animals. 3. The coons under observation developed a characteristic of depositing their excrement in a fixed place and covering it there, a form of behavior to which they are not accustomed in the wild. 4. The raccoons under observation showed Wide differences in temperament, differences which are fundamental in the interpretation of all tests on their intelligence. 5. The experiments in which the animal opened various locking devices in order to obtain food showed a considerable variety of attack in the case of different animals, and to a certain extent in the same animal at different stages. The perfecting of the power of undoing fastenings is accomplished by a slow series of small changes, consisting chiefly in the omission of unnecessary movements and the combination of those required. 6. The order of procedure in working the combination locks was perfected before the amount of effort necessary was fully learned. 7. Experience with former fastenings holds over in the case of new ones, leading the animal, at least in certain cases, to begin his attack at the place on the surface of the food box where he has been accustomed to work. This has been found by Thorndike in the case of cats, but denied by Cole in the case of raccoons. 8. When an animal is forced to approach a familiar fastening from a new direction, it is often about as much bothered by it as by a new fastening. Nevertheless, in course of time, the animals seem to reach a sort of generalized manner of procedure which enables them to deal more promptly with any new fastening, not too different from others of their experience, than with the first few which they mastered. 9. The old animals seem to learn less rapidly at first than the young, but profit more by their experience later, possibly because they are more attentive to the matter in hand and are more economical in the matter of effort and movement. These age differences appear in the learning curves. 10. The learning curves for the raccoons and Kinnaman's monkeys, so far as they permit a comparison of the animals, seem to show a nearly equal facility in learning to undo fastenings. 11. Tests of the raccoon's powers of retention show that skill in undoing simple fastenings, once learned, remains practically undiminished for periods of no practice of more than a year. In the case of the combination locks, the memory was imperfect after a period of 286 days, but the relearning was rapid, only 24 trials being necessary to gain a facility that originally required 107. There was evidence in certain cases, where the intervals of practice were relatively short, of a gain in facility during the period of no practice, so that the animal began with fewer mistakes after the interval than before. This may, however, have been due to the beneficial effect of rest, since the animal usually went to sleep at once after the tests. 13. The animals after practice adapt themselves correctly to comparatively small differences in the situation with which they are confronted. 14. The experiments on the discrimination of colors and brightness indicate with extreme probability that the raccoon is colorblind. The raccoon's nocturnal manner of life would lead the experimenter to expect this result. 15. No certain cases of imitation of one raccoon by another were observed. The 2 or 3 doubtful cases were on the instinctive, not upon the rational level. I wish here to thank Dr. E.C. Sanford for his kindly encouragement, suggestions, and criticism during the entire period of observation. I owe acknowledgment also to Mr. J.H. Starr for assistance in the capture of the animals, and observation of the habits of animals in the wild which were fresh and first-hand. Plate 2. Figures 1, 2, and 3 show animals number 4, 6, and 2 in characteristic attitudes of attention. Figure 4, number 3 in the attitude of fear. Figure 5, combination number 1 closed and set, ready to be given to the animal. Figure 6, number 2 in a characteristic resting or sleeping attitude. Figure 7, number 8 at the left in the attitude of fear, and number 2 at the right, ready to fight. Figure 8. Internal mechanism of combination number 1, showing the interplay of locking devices. Figure 9. Number 1 in the act of opening 3 and 4 in combination number 1. Figure 10. Number 2 in the attitude of attention. Figure 11, number 3, begging for food. Bibliography. 1. Audubon, J.J., and Bachman, J. The Quadrupeds of North America, Volume 2, pages 74 through 82, New York. 2. Berry, Charles Scott. The Imitative Tendency of White Rats. Journal of Comparative Neurological Psychology, Volume 16, pages 333 through 361. 3. Boll, Franz. Zur Anatomie und Physiologie der Retina. Journal of Physiology. Bois Raymond, 1877, pages 4 through 36, Leipzig. 4. Bostock, F. Training of Wild Animals, New York, 1903, pages Roman numeral 17 through 256. 5. Brehm, Tierleben, Leipzig, 1883. 6. Bureau American Ethnology, 19th Annual Report, 1897 to 1898, pages 264 through 270, 289 to 290, and 449. Okay. 7. Bureau of American Ethnology, 22nd Annual Report, 1900 to 1901, pages 136 through 202. 8. Burke, F. From Fundamental to Accessory in the Development of the Nervous System and Movements. Ped Sem, Volume 6, pages 1 through 60. 9. Chamberlain, A.F. Journal of American Folklore, Volume 2, pages 142 through 143, New York, 1889. 10. Cole, L.W. Concerning the Intelligence of Raccoons, Journal of Comparative Neurological Psychology, Volume 17, pages 211 through 261. Davis, J. R. Ainsworth. Natural History of Animals, London, 1894, Volume 2, pages 229 through 230. Darwin, Charles. The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, New York, 1897, pages Roman numeral 6 and 372. 13. Edinger, Ludwig. The Anatomy of the Central Nervous System of Man and of Vertebrates in General. Philadelphia, 1900, pages Roman numeral 11 plus 446. 14. Franz, Shepherd Ivory. Observations on the functions of the association areas, cerebrum, in Journal of the American Medical Association, Chicago, 1906, Volume 47, page 1464. 15. Garner, R.L. Apes and Monkeys, Their Life and Language, Boston, 1900, pages Roman numeral 13 plus 297. 16. Groos, Carl. The Play of Animals, New York, 1898, page 341. 17. Jastrow, Joseph. Fact and Fable in Animal Psychology. Popular Science Monthly, Volume 59, pages 138 through 146. 18. Kidd, Walter. The Sense of Touch in Mammals and Birds, with reference to the papillary ridges. London, 1907, page 175. 19. Kinnaman, A.J. Mental life of two Macacus rhesus monkeys in captivity. 1 and 2. American Journal of Psychology, 1902, Volume 13, page 98 through 148, 173 through 218. 20. Von Kreis, J. Beitrag zur Physiologie der Gesichtsempfindungen. Journal of Physiology, Bois Ramon, 1878, pages 503 through 524. 21. Loeb, Jacques. Comparative Physiology of the Brain and Comparative Psychology. New York, 1900, page 309. 22. Meltzer, S.J. Inhibition. New York, Medical Journal, Volume 59, pages 661 through 666, 699 through 703, 739 through 743. 23. Mills, Thomas Wesley. The Nature and Development of Animal Intelligence. T.F. Irwin, 1898. Pages Roman numeral 12 plus 307. 24. Morat, J.P. Physiology of the Nervous System. Chicago, 1906. Pages 553 through 600. 25. Morgan, C. Lloyd. Animal Life and Intelligence. Boston, 1895. Pages Roman numeral 16 plus 512. 26. Morgan, C. Lloyd, An Introduction to Comparative Psychology, New York, 1904, pages Roman numeral 14 plus 386. 27. Perrineau, M.H. La sensibilité de l'œil aux couleurs spectrales. Revue Science, 4e série, tome 4, pages 134 through 141. 28. Peckham, George W., and Elizabeth G. Wasps, Social and Solitary. Boston, 1905. Pages Roman numeral 15 plus 311. 29. Romain, G.T. Mental Evolution in Animals. New York, 1884. Page 411. 30. Robinson, Lewis. The Science of Ticklishness. North American Review, Volume 185, pages 410 through 419. 31. Slonaker, J.R., A Comparative Study of the Area of Acute Vision in Vertebrates. Journal of Morphology, Volume 13, pages 445 through 494. 32. Small, W.S., An Experimental Study of the Mental Processes of the Rat. American Journal of Psychology, Volume 2, pages 133 through 165, Volume 12, pages 206 through 239. 33. Thorndike, E.L., The Mental Life of Monkeys. Psychology Review, Monograph Supplement Number 15, May 1901, page 57. Thorndike, E.L., Animal Intelligence. Psychology Review Monograph Supplement Number 8, 1898, pages Roman numeral 2 plus 109. 35. U.S. Geological Survey of the Rocky Mountain Region. Contribution to North American Ethnology, Volume 6, pages 310 through 317. 36. Velvin, Ellen. Behind the Scenes with Wild Animals. New York, 1906, page 222. 37. Watson, M. On the Female Organs and Placentation of the Raccoon. Procedures of the Royal Society, Volume 32, pages 272 through 298. 38. Watson, John B. Animal Education, an experimental study of the psychical development of the white rat, correlated with the growth of its nervous system. University of Chicago Press, 1903, page 122. 39. Wortman, J.L., and Matthew W.D., Ancestry of certain members of the Canidae, the Viveridae, and Procinidae. Bulletin of the American Museum of Natural History, Volume 12, 1899, page 109, and pages 131 through 138. Yerkes, Robert M. Animal Psychology and Criteria of the Psyche. Journal of Philosophy, Psychology, and Scientific Methods, Volume 2, pages 141 through 149. Finis.